Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me where you are watching from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. That evening started as an ordinary stop in a grocery store parking lot, the kind where the air smells faintly of warm asphalt, and everyone moves with a quiet purpose, thinking about dinner or the long day behind them. I had just finished loading my bags into the trunk when I heard someone quietly call my name from behind. It wasn't loud, just enough to cut through the soft hum of idling cars and distant shopping carts. When I turned, I saw him, Daniel, my close friend Linda's son, who I had known since he was barely tall enough to reach a countertop. He stood there with that familiar gentle smile of his, the kind he'd had even as a child, though now there was something quieter behind it, more adult, more thoughtful. I hadn't seen him in years. Time has a way of creating distance even without intention, and I suppose I never realized how much I missed that sweet boy who used to run around Linda's backyard chasing fireflies while we sat on the porch talking about life and the future. He walked toward me slowly, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, his hair a little longer than I remembered. "I wasn't sure it was you," he said with an almost shy chuckle. "But then you did that thing you always do, talking to yourself while loading the car." I laughed before I even realized I was doing it. "I don't do that." "You always did," he teased gently. "You'd hum or mumble to the bags like they were your coworkers." His memory surprised me. Not because it was true, though it certainly was, but because he had noticed something so small back then, and still remembered it. We stood there for a moment, letting the years settle in around us, forming a bridge neither of us seemed to know how to cross right away. He leaned slightly against the cart coral, the golden light of the setting sun casting a soft, warm glow across the side of his face. It brought back a wave of years in an instant: birthdays, backyard cookouts, late-night talks with Linda while the children played on the living room floor. So much time, somehow wrapped into a single breath. "How have you been?" he asked, his tone warm but edged with something that felt unusually sincere, almost concerned. "Mom says you've had a lot going on these last few years." I felt my chest tighten a little, the way it does when someone touches a part of your life you've learned to close off. "I've managed," I said softly. "Life, well, it brings its seasons." He nodded like he understood more than I had said, and maybe he did. People grow up quietly, almost without you noticing. And then one day they look at you with the kind of awareness you never saw coming. "I always wondered how you were doing," he said, looking at the ground for a moment. "You were always someone I remembered fondly." His words were simple, but something about them pressed gently against an old part of me, a place filled with forgotten warmth and long-settled memories. I felt the breeze shift, carrying with it the smell of distant pine trees, and suddenly I was back in Linda's yard watching this young boy climb the big oak tree while I laughed and pretended not to worry he'd fall. "I didn't think you'd even remember me," I'd admitted. He laughed in that quiet, familiar way. "You were unforgettable. You still are." For a second, I wasn't sure what to say. Not because the words were inappropriate, they weren't, but because they carried a kind of honesty I hadn't expected. It felt like a sincere, open-hearted moment meant for two people standing between past and present, unsure which direction to look. The parking lot around us felt suddenly smaller, quieter, like the world had stepped back to give space for a conversation long overdue. Cars passed, people walked by, carts rolled, but somehow the noise felt far away. "I'm glad I ran into you," he said finally, his voice softer, almost reflective. "There were questions I always wanted to ask you, things I didn't understand when I was younger." The way he said it held a weight I wasn't prepared for, something personal and earnest, something that hinted at feelings or memories not yet spoken. And in that moment, under the fading light of the early evening, I felt something shift inside me, a gentle opening of a door I hadn't touched in years. A door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through, but I couldn't deny the warmth that came from seeing him again. For a moment, neither of us moved. It was as if the years we'd missed were all standing quietly between us, waiting to see how we would handle them. I leaned back against my car, letting the cool metal steady me. Daniel shifted his weight, looking a little unsure, as though he was balancing something he had carried with him for a long time. "You said you had questions," I said gently, inviting him to speak without pushing too hard. He took a slow breath. "Yeah, questions. And maybe things I never understood about myself back then. About why certain moments stuck with me." He paused, searching my face. "You were always kind to me, more than you probably realized." I wasn't sure what he meant. Back then, I was simply the family friend who made sure he had snacks and checked his homework when Linda was caught up with work. But he looked at me with an expression that said he carried those moments far differently. He continued quietly, "When I was younger, I used to talk to you about things I didn't talk about with anyone else. You listened, even when I rambled or said things that didn't make sense." He let out a soft laugh. "Most adults brushed me off. You didn't." His sincerity warmed something in me that I didn't expect to feel in the middle of a grocery store parking lot. It wasn't romantic, and it wasn't inappropriate. It was simply heartfelt, an honest appreciation that felt rare these days. "I guess I always wanted you to know that," he added. I nodded, my smile softening. "Thank you, Daniel. I didn't know it made such a difference." He looked relieved, as though he had finally handed over a thought he'd been carrying for too long. The sun had nearly dipped behind the trees, leaving only a soft orange glow reflecting off the parked cars. Shadows stretched long across the pavement, giving the moment a kind of quiet privacy. "Do you remember that night after my high school graduation?" he asked suddenly. I felt my breath catch for a moment. "The one where everyone came back to your house for snacks and cake?" "Yes," he said with a small smile. "You sat with me on the back porch when everyone else was inside celebrating. I was overwhelmed, and I didn't want anyone to see it." I did remember. He had been standing alone by the railing, looking smaller than usual, though he had grown tall that year. I had stepped outside to get some air and found him trying to hold himself together. He finally admitted he felt unsure about his future, worried he would disappoint everyone. "You told me something that night," he said now, pulling me back from the memory. "You said, everyone grows at their own speed, and sometimes the people who look the strongest are the ones who just hide their worries better." I hadn't thought about that line in years, but hearing it again made my chest tighten with a quiet emotion. "That meant a lot to me," he said. "It helped me through more years than you know." His voice had changed, lower, steadier, carrying a maturity that felt surprising yet comforting. Something about him was different from the boy I once knew, but the familiar gentleness remained. A breeze moved across the parking lot, rustling a stray receipt on the ground. The lights of the store flickered on, casting a soft glow over us. "It sounds silly," Daniel went on, "but I've always carried that memory with me. I guess that's why this moment feels important. Like I finally get to tell you what you gave me back then." I didn't speak right away. His words were meaningful in a way that felt deeply personal but still respectful. It wasn't crossing a line. It was recognizing a connection that had simply existed quietly over the years. "You grew into a good man," I said softly. "I'm proud of you, Daniel. Truly." He swallowed, as though the compliment reached deeper than he expected. "I'm glad you think so." There was a pause, the comfortable kind you don't feel pressured to fill. The kind that suggests the conversation isn't over, just shifting into something more reflective. "Would you?" He hesitated before finishing. "Would you walk with me for a bit? Just around the lot. I'm not ready to say goodbye yet." His voice carried a hopeful sincerity, not in a youthful or impulsive way, but in a thoughtful, grounded one. And somewhere inside me, an old warmth stirred, one that remembered those porch conversations, those afternoons in Linda's kitchen, and the quiet trust he had always shown me. So I closed my car door gently and nodded. "All right," I said. "Let's walk." We walked side by side along the edge of the parking lot, the sky above us shifting from soft orange to the deeper blues of early evening. The lights along the storefronts clicked on one by one, casting long reflections onto the pavement. There was something calming about the way our footsteps echoed together, steady and unhurried. It felt as though the world had slowed down just enough for the two of us to finally catch up. Daniel kept his hands in his pockets, occasionally glancing over at me with a thoughtful expression. It wasn't the look of someone searching for words. It was the look of someone preparing to say something that mattered. "I'd always wondered why you drifted away after those years," he finally said, not in a blaming way, just curiosity. His question touched a sensitive place inside me. I exhaled slowly. "Life changed," I said. "Your mother and I stayed friends, but our lives began taking different paths. And then my own challenges came along." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes when you're going through difficult seasons, you retreat without realizing it." He nodded slowly, understanding more than I expected. "Mom always said you had your reasons." She respected that. We kept walking, passing by a row of cars with their windows reflecting the last slivers of daylight. The evening air was cool enough to make me pull my jacket a little tighter, though the conversation itself warmed me in a way that surprised me. "I remember hearing bits and pieces," he continued, "and sometimes I wondered if you still thought about us, about those days." "I did," I answered without looking at him at first. "More often than you'd think. Those were good years. Quiet, simple, full of people who cared about each other." Then I turned my head and offered a small smile. "You were a bright part of those days." That seemed to catch him off guard. "I was." "You were," I said. "You had this way of making everyone feel lighter. You might not have noticed it, but you brought a kind of calmness wherever you went." He let out a soft laugh with a shy shake of his head. "I never thought anyone saw that." "Sometimes people see us more clearly than we see ourselves," I replied. There was another quiet moment as we reached the far corner of the lot, where a row of pine trees created a soft barrier between the asphalt and the neighborhood beyond. A faint scent of pine drifted through the breeze, carrying a wave of nostalgia with it. Summer evenings, porch lights, laughter drifting from someone's open window. "That night after graduation," he said again, "when you talked to me on the porch, it wasn't just comforting. It felt like you understood me in a way I didn't know how to explain." I felt something inside me soften at the memory. "I just listened," I said gently. "Sometimes that's all a person needs." "But it stayed with me," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "You stayed with me." His honesty wasn't heavy or inappropriate. It was simply heartfelt, an expression years in the making. It carried a sincerity that felt rare in a world where conversations were often rushed or shallow. "I used to think about coming to see you," he added, "just to talk, just to reconnect. But I wasn't sure if it would matter, or if I was just holding on to the past." "It would have mattered," I said before I could second-guess myself. "I always valued you, Daniel. Maybe I just didn't say it often enough." He looked down at the ground, then up again, his eyes warmer than before. "You saying that now, it means a lot." We walked a little farther until we reached a quiet spot near the line of trees. The sounds of the parking lot faded, replaced by the distant chirping of early night insects. The soft glow of a street lamp cast a warm circle around us. "I didn't expect tonight to feel like this," he said in a low voice, like something being set right again. I felt the same. There was a gentle mending happening between us, old memories aligning with new understanding, creating a sense of closure and beginning all at once. Sometimes life brings people back around, I said, not by accident. He glanced at me, studying my expression, as if trying to understand whether I meant more than the words themselves. I wasn't even sure myself. I only knew the moment felt meaningful, unexpected, emotional, but grounded in genuine care. I'm glad you came over when you saw me, I added. I'm glad we're talking like this. So am I, he murmured. More than you know. The evening air settled around us, still and full of quiet significance. It wasn't the kind of silence that asked for distance. It was the kind that invited reflection, connection, and something unspoken but deeply respectful. In that soft circle of light, with the world just far enough away, it felt like the past and present were finally meeting. We stood beneath the street lamp for a few quiet seconds, the soft golden light settling over us like a gentle reminder that some conversations aren't meant to be rushed. Daniel shifted closer, not in a bold way, but in a thoughtful, grounded one, like someone gathering the courage to speak a truth that had lived inside them far longer than they'd intended. I used to think, he began carefully, that the people who made the biggest impact on you were the ones who stayed in your life. But now I realize, sometimes it's the ones who show up during a certain season, the ones who help you see yourself differently. His words echoed something I had felt for years but never had the chance to express. I let my shoulders relax as I listened, sensing the honesty underneath his voice. When Mom talked about you, he continued, she always said you were strong, even when you were hurting. And I guess I always wondered how you carried so much without letting it harden you. I met his eyes, and there was no judgment there, only respect, and a quiet admiration that felt sincere and mature. I learned to keep going, I said softly. Life doesn't always give us the comfort of choosing when things fall apart, but it does give us the choice to keep walking forward. And you did, he said, nodding gently. I always noticed that. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. It wasn't often that someone saw beyond the surface of my life, especially someone who had once been a boy running around the yard with grass stains on his knees. Yet here he was, grown, grounded, and speaking to me in a way that felt unexpectedly healing. You know, I said, I think we underestimate the way children observe us. You were always more perceptive than people realized. He laughed quietly. Maybe. Or maybe I just paid attention to the people who made me feel safe. The simplicity of his statement touched something deep inside me. Not romantic, not improper, just sincere. A recognition of emotional safety, the kind you don't find easily, even as an adult. We began walking back toward our cars, the evening settling into a calm hush around us. The lights of the store flickered on and off as employees gathered carts, and the faint sound of a motorcycle rolling by hummed through the air. Everyday noises, yet somehow the moment around them felt anything but ordinary. Can I ask you something? Daniel said as we reached the row where we'd started. Of course. Do you ever feel like certain people come back into your life to remind you of who you were before the hard years came? I considered his question thoughtfully. Yes, I answered. I do. Sometimes they show you a reflection of yourself that you forgot existed. That's what this feels like, he admitted. Seeing you again. It reminded me of those porch talks, the comfort I felt around you. Something about tonight feels like finding a part of myself I didn't know I'd lost. His sincerity wrapped gently around the moment, grounding it, giving it weight without crossing any boundary. I felt myself breathe a little deeper, realizing the conversation was giving me something too. Permission to remember the parts of my life that were warm and uncomplicated. You know, I said, maybe we both needed this. Maybe this conversation was overdue in more ways than we realized. I think so, he replied quietly. We reached our cars, parked only a few spaces apart. The breeze carried a soft rustle through the nearby pine branches, lifting the edges of his jacket and brushing the hair from my face. He looked at me with an expression that held gratitude, gentleness, and something deeper, something unspoken but respectful. "I'm really glad I saw you today," he said. "I didn't know how much I needed this until now." I smiled, feeling that same warmth rise in my chest. "Me too, Daniel. Truly, you brought back memories I didn't realize were still so close to the surface." He hesitated, then reached out his hand, not boldly, not urgently, but with quiet intention. I placed my hand in his, and for a moment we simply held on to the connection between us. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't suggestive. It was a gesture full of appreciation, gratitude, and the acknowledgement of a bond that had survived years of silence. "You helped shape a part of who I became," he said softly. "I just wanted you to know that before we said goodnight." "And you reminded me," I replied, "that some connections never really fade. They just wait for the right moment to return." We let go of each other's hand, slowly, respectfully. Then he stepped back with a gentle smile. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," I replied, "and don't wait another decade before saying hello." He laughed softly at that, nodding. "I won't." I watched him walk to his car, the quiet confidence in his steps illuminated by the parking lot lights. As I had opened my own door, I realized something unexpected. Tonight had given me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity, warmth, and a sense of emotional closure mixed with new beginnings. Sometimes the conversations you never saw coming are the ones that stay with you the longest. And as I drove away, the memory of that gentle parking lot glow stayed with me, reminding me that even after years of distance, some connections return just when you need them most.